Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Alice, for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll remember to hold it down now. Hi. Thank you guys for coming. It's so nice to see everyone.
It's been different from a Zoom meeting, huh? Being here, even if it's not the big 2019 crowd.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to be with people, so it's been pretty special.
It is. So you have two movies here, and we'll just jump into the first trailer, and then we can talk about the film, and
Okay.
obviously about your process, which I'm totally interested about.
Amazing. Thank you.
Let me just listen to my block. It's quiet. Usually the one train's up there screeching.
There's so much stuff going on. Just got me thinking about all the people I care about the most. There's a breeze off the Hudson. And just when you think you're sick of living here, the memory floods in. The morning light off the fire escapes. The nights in Bennett Park blasting Big Pun tapes. It's a story of a block that was disappearing once upon a time in a faraway land called Washington Heights. Who's gonna notice we're gone? Say it so it doesn't disappear.
Washington Heights!
Look who's home! Bad changes happening on the block since you've been at school. When it came to dreams, we had to keep scraping by.
Ice cold piragua.
It's silly when we get into these crazy hypotheticals. You really want some bread, then go ahead, create a set of goals.
I pick a business school and pay the entrance fee. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll stay friends with me.
They used to say, you work hard, you live by the rules, the things will come, and those things will heal you. I'm not gonna sit here and give you some fairy tale.
Ignore anyone who doubts you.
Cause this place, this is it.
1, 2, 3.
I just wanna see the whole world through her eyes.
Let's go!
Go show them who we are.
Today's all we got, so we cannot stop. This is our block!
This is the moment when you do better than me. Because you can see a future that I can't.
Sonny, you're late. You know you love me?
We can pay off the debts we owe.
Tell everyone we know.
We are not powerless. We are powerful.
And we'll get the dough, and once we get going, we're never gone.
96,000. Tiptoe. 96,000. 96,000. Get the dough, and once we get going, we're never gonna stop.
What's your relationship to music?
To music? Well, I grew up in New York. My father was a playwright, and my mom was a actress, dancer, singer, and so music was always in our house. We went to Broadway shows when we could, but we always had different musicals playing in our house: Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, and so we just grew up with my mom singing to us all the time.
Because I've always seen there's a huge relationship between images and music, and rhythm especially. Is that something, when preparing for the movie, going into the music, and how does that affect, everything you do?
So on this movie, I worked with a director named John M. Chu, who I've known since college. We went to USC to film school together. So we met 20 years ago, and we bonded over our love of musicals. We did a short film there, his thesis film called When the Kids Are Away. And at the time, very few musicals were being made. It was very much sort of a lost genre. Chicago hadn't come out yet, and Moulin Rouge hadn't come out yet. This was spring of 2002. And when he approached me, I was completely amazed and blown away that someone wanted to make a musical, because that was what I dreamed of doing when I grew up, and no one was doing it. And so we made this musical short, and then we didn't do stuff for a while. And then in 2009, John called me and said, I've got this idea for this web series, and this was at the very beginning of web content, and it was one of Hulu's first produced shows, and it was called the League of Extraordinary Dancers, the LXD. And so and he said, it's really going to be an experiment. There are no rules. They're letting us do what we want, and we're just going to play. And so every episode on that movie was a different genre, but it was all dance. But we did a Western, and we did a horror one, and we did a ballet, and sort of like a teenage contemporary one in a high school gym. And we started working with the choreographer Christopher Scott, who ended up doing In the Heights with us. And we did 30 episodes over 3 years, and it really became this amazing playground to learn to tell a story through music, through song and dance. And we messed up in huge ways sometimes. We could risk anything. There was nothing riding on it. And so we tried, and we experimented, and we played. And then for the next decade, we did a bunch of other musically driven things. And once we got to In the Heights, John said to Chris and I, somewhere in the middle of it, he's like, do you realize we've worked our whole careers to make this movie? And I think the fact that we got to play so much plays into like rhythm and lighting with rhythm too.
Can you explain a little bit more what it means to work with music, to do musicals in that kind of a way, what you learned or what didn't work especially maybe as well?
Oh gosh, I don't remember quite what didn't work. I mean, back a decade ago, but it was, well, I mean, we would try lighting dancers from different angles and seeing and just playing a lot with lighting, because I was interested in like how bodies move through space. And so at first I started just doing environmental lighting, and one of our first episodes was probably one of my favorites, and it was very simple, but I don't know if I can answer any further than that, or you can.
Oh, sure. If we break it down, let's say lighting, because you were mentioning that. What do you look for in lighting when lighting people going through space? That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, so for instance, In the Heights, it's a big club number, and we start upstairs and we move downstairs, and so the way we lit it environmentally, but we never like lit a close-up. It was all environmental light. Or in this scene in particular, we used lots of moving theatrical lights. So throughout the scene, we've got this sort of warm color and amber color, and what we did was we had moving cyan lights throughout so that your eye never got used to anything. There's lots of storytelling elements in this. We need to learn a lot about the relationship between this character, Vanessa, and our lead, Usnavi, and so, but we lit the space. And I think the fact that I had so much practice on LXD lighting space versus just lighting actors' faces made a big difference.
It's a really interesting point you make about when you wash something in a color and that you need contrast not to get used to it. Is that something you just do automatically now, or was it something like you do additive? You try out one color, and then from there you go on to the next. Do you have color palettes, actually, in combination that work well for you?
Well, this scene we knew we were going to do, we during our tests, we had picked out this red and this yellow color, and we loved it. But then once we got into this huge space, we realized our eye was very, very quickly just everything looked the same. The yellow and the red weren't different enough to make your mind see anything but that. And so I remember watching a movie called 13, where I really started to understand how used to color you can get, because I had it on DVD and I watched it all the way through, and then I rewound it and on high speed, and I could watch the whole movie go backwards, and I could see the color slowly shift. And so your eye gets and there's a huge difference between the first scene and the last scene, but it was something they didn't want, the filmmakers didn't want you to know that, right? Like they wanted it to shift without it being completely conscious. But here we didn't just want you to get used to, this is the only scene we have this color palette, and so we didn't want anyone's eye to get used to that.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? Because it's not only about how we perceive stuff on set, it's actually what happens afterwards in the audience in terms of, progression of stories. That's something that you were working on as well with colors and palettes, how they shift throughout the movie?
We play a lot with color in the Heights, but nothing is super saturated, and the way we found our color palette, we don't have a big shift through the movie at all. Until the very last scene in the Bodega, and there is a big shift, but it's not. It's a natural shift. It's not like anything goes crazy. So.
I mean, you can see it in the trailer because it's like this boost of energy coming up. So it totally makes sense what you're saying. So you were using color just to heighten the moment?
Well, what's unique about In the Heights is each character's hopes and dreams and their fears and their anxiety can be told not only through song and dance, but through the environment around them. And sometimes the environment shifts visually to where they are emotionally. And so when things shift visually, it's in the musical numbers. So we have sort of this everyday life, and then the first time we see a hint of something shifting visually is you've got our lead actor in the very opening number. He's walking across the street. There's no dancing yet. And he steps on a piece of gum and he scrapes it on a manhole cover, and the manhole cover starts to spin. And it's just this little hint that there's going to be magic later on, and we build up sort of that trust in the audience to the moment where we have the dancers on the side of the building dancing and defying gravity. And so, and then the first time we see any dance in the movie is also in the opening number, but it's much later. We've now introduced all our characters, and the bodega owner goes up to the storefront window. He's inside, and he goes up to the storefront window, and we introduce dancing at the very beginning through a reflection. And then suddenly now we're in his dream. We're in his version of what his hopes and dreams are when he steps outside onto the street, and now the streets are filled with dancers.
So when you, for example, have the scene here in the whatever environment, in the club, yeah, something you pre-light, you look at, and for the dancing as well, is that stuff that's being rehearsed?
So the dancers and the actors showed up 12 weeks before we started shooting, and they had music boot camp, dance boot camp, because some of our actors aren't dancers, and so like Vanessa was not a salsa dancer, and she had to learn, and it was one of the hardest. I mean, I watched her. To learn to dance in 12 weeks is pretty intense, and it just completely remarkable how all the actors threw themselves into this. So my days were I'd spend the mornings location scouting with the director and the production designer, and then in the afternoons, the director and the production designer and I, or not the production designer, the director, the choreographer, and I would be at dance rehearsal, and we'd see what they had done during the day. And we didn't rehearse in order, and sometimes it started with only a few people and then started building out. But we're also in a dance studio, and so we're in a space that has tape lines on the ground to sort of, so we understand what our space was. But the club we didn't find till very late, and so we didn't know what the space was going to be. So we were actually rehearsing in smaller spaces than what we ended up. I should back up. During prep, we had picked the colors. And so then during that test day, that's when we started to notice it wasn't going to work unless we had a cyan to get thrown in there.
Sure. I was always wondering about that. With working with a lighting designer and figuring out what their part of the job is, where do you think is the biggest difference in terms of how they work or how it works together with the gaffer and with you? How does that work?
Well, with her, it was great because we were in a real club, and so we were able to use some of the light fixtures there to save money, and then there was we had a dimmer board op with us the whole movie, but there was an in-house dimmer board op. So it's sort of, I've done this a couple of times where we go into real spaces, theaters and things where there's a dimmer board and you can't, the person in the theater or in the club needs to still control that dimmer board. And so Christina sort of was like the person between film and live kind of lighting, and so I was able to talk to her, and she very quickly understood what I wanted. We did a lot of prep work too with her, so but she understood what, like if I said I at first, when we threw the cyan in, it was everywhere, and I was like, no, that's not what I want. I want wherever the camera's pointed for the cyan to be a backlight spinning, nothing in the front. And so whichever direction we looked in, she was she could quickly program a cyan light for a backlight that would then spin around the room.
So it was more she was there for the technical side of things.
Yeah, but she also did suggest these movie theatrical lights, the color temperature always matches pretty exact for LEDs, but these, she'd program in a red, and it was just like this crazy red, and then we had to fine tune because we had picked the color, so we had picked the color and taken a color temperature reading, but we had done it with sky panels, and so then we're in a club with theatrical lights, and the color temperature did not match and the RGB did not match.
Fun times.
It was fun. It was a big experiment. And so that Sunday, that's all we did was figure out exactly, fine-tune that color and figure out how we wanted the lights to move. And we played the music because we had the music for months. And so we played the music as well and started to make sure it was building and it was changing a little bit, because the numbers starts just sort of normal in a club, and then it gets pretty chaotic.
And in terms of camera movement, is something you do in rehearsal as well? You figure out what kind of movements work?
Yeah, I mean, in dance rehearsal, we obviously don't have a crane or a dolly, but we do moves, and there were times with our iPhones, and then there's lots of crane shots in this scene, and so John Chu, Chris Scott, and I would look at our footage on the weekends together and go, okay, well, we know we want something like this here, but then we want to all of a sudden sweep up, or we really need a high bird's eye shot. There's this one moment we call the shine, where you've got boys on one side and girls on the other dancing, sort of battling each other, and we knew we wanted a bird's eye shot for that, and those are things we are not getting in a dance rehearsal space.
Yeah, of course, but you get a feeling for it, how it's gonna work together.
Yeah.
When the choreography and everything's going and you're rolling, do you still change stuff, or is that like it's locked because it's...
No, I mean, that's the really, really fun thing about working with people that you've known for 20 years or 15 years, is that John could have an idea suddenly, and Chris Scott and I can quickly be really flexible and adjust. And our whole team, all the camera operators understood that there were going to be moments where something was much better than we ever planned, and so we would need to change things, or choreography would come in first thing in the morning and have to rework the whole number for the real space. Sometimes they'd get into the space earlier, but it was stuff we hadn't seen because we had only seen it in dance rehearsal.
How many cameras were you using?
We used 3 cameras for any big numbers, and then we have there's a single number, a oneer called Champagne, so we used 1 camera for that. And then we shot in practical locations in Washington Heights for 39 of our 49 days, and this is a practical location, and some of the apartments and stuff were really small, so we'd end up with 1 camera or 2 cameras for those scenes.
Sure, but for dance stuff, you're doing coverage? Because I'm so not unfamiliar, so I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 12-hour, 2-day workout for all these dancers. So we are rolling 3 cameras no matter what. Our C camera operator, her name's Denise Bailey, was excellent at. She actually always had her camera on the ground on a slider, and in between each take, she'd move somewhere else. And we ended up with these really wonderful, because she could hide in the crowd, we ended up with these really wonderful low-angle shots that we used tons of in the movie, and those weren't planned per se, versus our A and B camera had very, very specific shots that we had to get, and we do take after take after take, but C camera would move. Each time we cut, she'd just move to another angle. Even if it was 3 inches right or left, it just gave, or she'd throw on a different lens. I gave her the freedom to almost be a documentary filmmaker in this scene, so that, because we knew we would need some cutaways that we didn't, and these dancers can only dance for so long.
Sounds like it's really crucial. I mean, as always, but how do you pick your teams? How do you put that together to get that energy? Because that sounds...
So I never had done a union movie in New York before. This was my first big movie, period. I mean, I've done union movies, but this was a much bigger project than I had ever done before. And so I didn't know anyone in New York. But the line producer was someone who John Chu and I have worked with a ton, David Nixay, and he started introducing me to just like the most wonderful people. And I was in Vancouver doing a TV series, but New York is really busy, like many cities in the world, with production right now. And so I had to hire people without meeting them. And this was pre-Zoom. This was January 2019. And so people didn't think of having Zoom meetings. So I was having all these just phone calls with key grips and gaffers and camera operators and DITs. And I had to make decisions really fast because it was like, I mean, we shot at the same time as lots of movies that are coming out right now, so, or this year. And so it was really about if I clicked with someone on the phone to hire them, and then hopefully we really did like each other. And in the end, it was just like the most wonderful, wonderful team of people. They were my collaborators. And actually, I love to tell people this because I think it's one of the best things I learned on this movie, is that it was really important to me while I was in Washington Heights scouting, I started to fall in love with Washington Heights. And it was something that, like, I couldn't inject into people without taking them there. And so I asked the line producer, can the team come with me? Can the key grip, the gaffer, and the camera operators go to Washington Heights with me for 2 days? And we'll wander around and we'll look at the George Washington Bridge and we'll eat Dominican food and we'll sit on stoops and we'll see people playing their music and we'll see the pigeons that nest in this one spot on our intersection. And we just walk up and down the streets. And when we were done, and 2 of them I had never even met in person before. So it was our first meeting, and we spent 2 days together, and it was really just this team building thing. And also they understood what I was attracted to in Washington Heights, and and it gave them a sense of ownership themselves of the movie, that they were important and that they were part of making this movie.
It's a beautiful story to do that way, and it's a privilege as well to be able to be a part in that kind of way, because usually that crew comes up, it has come along when it's technical. And
right. I mean, usually the first time, camera operators sometimes, don't even get invited to the tech scout. So this was weeks before the tech scout that we got to do this. And then after that, I started doing lighting scouts. The camera operators didn't get to go to that, but we do lighting scouts at night in Washington Heights because we have a big number called blackout where the neighborhood has to go dark. And we had to figure out what storefronts we needed lights turned off and what street lights we needed the city to turn off. And so we did all these night scouts, and then I did day scouts on my own just for watching what the sun path was and what the quality of light was on our main intersection, because we shot at this one intersection at 175th Street and Audubon Avenue for 4 weeks. And it was at the longest days of the year. It was like January 22nd to July 22nd. And so I did all these lighting scouts because we have numbers with huge amounts of people, and the AD was very generous and really worked with me to make sure we were shooting scenes at the time of day that I wanted to shoot them, so that I didn't have to bring in big silk overheads on cranes, because the problem in New York is, like, if you want to move a lift with a silk on it, then it takes like 7 cop cars to get to move anything and shutting down the street. And so then suddenly, by the time you get it set up, the sun's no longer there. So it was really important light study to do way before we started shooting.
So basically you were using available light and kind of dancing with it as far as you could.
Yeah, I mean, there were times that wouldn't work, but for the most part, we were definitely dancing with the light and shooting in the direction that the sun was best.
What do you do if it doesn't work that he can go with it? What is your general approach to something like that?
If we don't get to shoot at that time of day? Oh, I mean, there were several times, something happened and the wardrobe wasn't right, or I don't know, the cast had to go back to the trailer for something, and then suddenly we've got this insanely bright sun, and I have to adapt. And so, and in those times, but I had been there enough that I was able to know, okay, we're not getting the cast back for a half an hour. Let's bring the lift in and start setting up some sun softening.
But it seems like key just the way you prepped it and the way you were able to organize yourself around what's going on. Was that for interior locations too? They were able to use that, or did you just lit?
Yeah. So our two locations here, the interior of the Bodega was a stage build, and what was great actually was on the stage we had we built somewhat of the intersection. We didn't shoot exteriors there, but we have views from the Bodega to the salon across the street. So we had the same distance, and we built a sky source with, it was 260 S60s through, I can't remember what diffusion, but through diffusion. And I wanted the sky to be as bright as the sky would be in New York. And we took color temperature readings when we shot all our exteriors first, so it was great matching. And so we took color temperature readings for each scene, and we took brightness levels for what was outside, and kept a very detailed record so that when we went to the set of the Bodega, we could match the color temperature and the intensity outside perfectly.
Okay, well, do you reference that back when you're like inside? You look at the stuff you've shot outside to kind of match it together, because that's like a painstaking process sometimes to get that to work, no? Yeah,
well, the Bodega, we were supposed to be able to do, we have tons of entrances and exits here, and we were supposed to do our entrances and exits at the real location, and the art director and production designer were going to dress just enough so that we could get those entrances and exits. And 3 days before we started shooting, the real Bodega owner really got worried that if his store was shut down for 4 weeks, that he'd never have a way to make money again, and everyone understood that. And so we all agreed we'd figure out a different way, because we really did want to make sure we weren't stealing from this community, that they were were our inspiration. And I mean, most of the extras are all people from the neighborhood. We did local casting calls. In the opening scene, we have something called the community chorus, where there's people who are actually really doing their jobs that we went and filmed, and infusing the community within our movie was very important to John Chu and Lin-Manuel Miranda and the whole crew.
Yeah, it's an incredible responsibility when you come on with such a big production and you take over a part of a town, no?
Yeah, I mean, this neighborhood hadn't had a movie made about it before, and the only time they felt that people came to make movies there or TV shows, it was always had to do with violence. And our movie, we don't have any bad guys, we don't have any villains, we have no weapons, there are no guns. It is truly trying to reach your dream is what this movie is about. And that is, and what are those obstacles that you have to overcome?
Yeah, it's a different way of doing a movie then, huh?
Yeah.
Like that. Cool. You're also showing Tick Tick Boom?
I am. Tonight I'm showing Tick Tick Boom, and tomorrow night, or tomorrow afternoon.
So maybe let's watch a trailer, because it's so interesting, because both movies were shot in New York, right?
Yeah.
To see how that all blends together. Before we go into that, I just want to kind of sum it up, because the amount of knowledge you have on doing dance movies and stuff, how would you, for anybody who's approaching that for the first time, what are the go-to things you would look for?
If at the very beginning, I would see if I could go find a ballet class, not to take class, but to go watch dancers. Or I think a class is better than like a performance situation, because there's there's just, or go take the class and then don't be very good at dancing. I can't dance at all. But go and like really start to immerse yourself in how in movement, and also watch action movies. I actually think dance and action movies are very, very similar, and the more, and people don't understand that musicals are just as technical and specific as action films, and it's completely the same.
In terms of the choreography of where cameras are going to be and how you need to take care of certain things?
Yeah, where cameras need to be, working with stunts. We work with choreographers, but it's the same thing. A stunt choreographer, understanding what angle will look best for that movement. And then, I remember like John Chu actually got an action movie at one point because he showed one of our episodes of the LXD to show he could do action, because it is dance and action are the same thing.
There's one thing I forgot to ask. It was so interesting because you basically hired your crew just on the phone, right? What's your process of hiring people? What do you look for?
Oh, I feel like I can call other people to find out if the people can do their jobs. It's definitely, when I hire people, all I want to know is if I'm going to get along with them for a long time and if they're good human beings. And so just start talking about your family or how you grew up or your favorite movie or what you like to eat. Those are the kind of questions that just like having a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, it's just like, if it was a great conversation, then I start to dive into, okay, let me talk to 5 DPs that they've worked with and see what their process is like, because anyone can sell you on their process, but I think it's harder to sell you on if you're, a really enthusiastic, excited, nice human being.
Yeah, because you got to know your job anyway, right? And then what's left over, right?
Yeah. And John always makes, he's like, always tells every department head, only hire nice people. It's really, he's like, we're spending our days together for months and months and months. It's hard. We were sweating. We were in the total heat. We had really challenging days. Steam was rising off the ground, and then days we were shooting cold, or the swimming pool scene where it was supposed to be hot was freezing cold, and the pool was like 50 degrees, the water. And so it's like, okay, who do you want to be in the mud with for 49 days?
And specific about choosing a gaffer for a movie, what are you looking for in a gaffer, technically especially, or in the collaboration?
I think a good listener, and I think it goes both ways for me listening to the gaffer, and for the gaffer being able to listen to me and understand me. And so I love to do tests really early on, as quickly as possible, just so that we start a rhythm. I worked with 2 different gaffers on Tick, Tick, Boom and In the Heights, and I love them both, and they're both totally different, have totally different working ways they work. And I worked with the same key grip on both, and all 3 of them I just completely adore, and would make movie after movie with all 3 of them.
So if they're so differently in the way they approach it, how do you know that your vision comes across?
Well, I'm looking at the footage. We're making a movie together, and I think both gaffers I worked with, Charlie Grubbs did In the Heights, and he was a rigging gaffer for many, many years, and he was the perfect person to do In the Heights, because we had these massive pre-rigs, and his rigging crew was amazing. And then on Tick, Tick, Boom, it's a much more intimate story, and Bill O'Leary did that, and Bill O'Leary did Blade Runner, so he clearly can do big pre-rigs as well. But he also says he's the only gaffer who doesn't like light, doesn't like to use lights, and his approach was very minimal, and that was really important for Tick, Tick, Boom. I wanted it to feel very natural and very real. And actually, why don't we play the trailer, and then I can talk about the look of Tick, Tick, Boom.
Hello. Hi. Welcome. I'm Jonathan Larson. I am 29 years old. I work at the Moondance Diner. Check. 1 sec. Do we take reservations? No, we do not take. We're a diner. I have an original rock musical
Hey, boy genius.
that I have spent the last 8 years of my life writing
It's getting out. You're gonna be rich and famous.
and rewriting.
Did you crack it yet?
Oh, I'm getting so close. And rewriting.
Can I hear it?
Any day now.
8 years! And the time keeps ticking. Tick, tick.
You need to ask, are you letting yourself be led by fear or by love?
Fear! 100% fear!
I don't know what the show is.
Why do we play with fire?
What if the workshop happens and nothing changes? What then, Jonathan?
Maybe I'm just wasting my time.
Do you know how many Jonathan Larsons there are? 1.
Why should we blaze a trail?
There's not enough time. I went to 3 friends' funerals last year, and nobody is doing enough. I'm not doing enough.
Try writing about what you know.
What does it take to wake up a generation?
It would be a tragedy to give up what you have.
Take off and fly. Fear or love, baby, don't say the answer. Actions speak louder than words.
No matter what.
They speak louder.
Keep going, okay?
Actions speak louder than.
So this movie doesn't have like the same spectacle that In the Heights has, and so when I first started talking to Lynn about Tick Tick Boom, we had just finished In the Heights, and I was meeting with him, to see if it would work for me to do his movie, and when I read the script page by page, I could see my childhood in this movie. Jonathan Larson wrote the musical Rent, and he lived in this, that you saw here, a tenement apartment building with a bathtub in the kitchen, and his house was filled with his friends and all these artists and wonderful, just creative human beings, and his friends were really his family. And my childhood was very similar. My father was a playwright trying to make it as a playwright, and it was my sister, my mom, my dog, and 2 cats, all living in 300 square feet, and my dad's friends filled our house, and my parents' friends, really, but it was this huge artist community, and I look back at that time where I was with all these great actors and great writers and great poets and great painters. It was like a salon in our living room often, and watching, and we'd watch on our little teeny television set, we'd all watch movies together. It was just this really wonderful time. And when I look back at that time and this movie takes place in 1990, and I was 10 years old in 1990, and so was Lynn. We're both the same age. And when I presented my ideas to Lynn, it was about, I showed him my photographs, and we started talking about how we wanted this movie to look like something out of a child's memory of what New York was in the 90s. And because Jonathan Larson was a very childlike figure, the opening song's called 3090, which is about him being Peter Pan, and not wanting to grow up. And so we wanted New York and Jonathan's world to feel like a 10-year-old, what is etched in a 10-year-old's memory, where color and light and emotions are all heightened. And sometimes the lines between reality and dreams are blurred. And that moment where the reality and dreams are blurred idea is where we built our musical numbers from. And so that's where we started with In the Heights. I mean, Tick, Tick, Boom.
Yeah. It's an incredible journey, now, if you're able to go back to something that's so emotional for you and to put it and to invest into the movie. You can only show in the results, right?
Yeah, and actually the AIDS epidemic is the backdrop of this movie, and we started this movie during, and I remember being a child and being very, it was a very, I mean, my family definitely lost friends, like Jonathan lost friends to HIV/AIDS, and so we started this movie before the pandemic. We shot 8 days and then we shut down for 6 months. And then we came back and we're suddenly making a movie that has the AIDS epidemic in it, and we're in the middle of our own pandemic, and the real feeling of like, how do we get COVID? How, you know, how can we not get COVID? And like, how can we protect ourselves? And all these lyrics Jonathan Larson wrote felt very true to this moment, even though he was writing them about AIDS.
That's very touching. Do you, for the other movies you do you try to find emotional connection for yourself too, to be able to invest it into the images?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, I feel like I'm definitely, what interests me about making movies is the emotional and intuitive connection to a film. I especially now, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and when I had my daughter, things began to change for the types of stories I wanted to tell. And I realized I wanted to tell stories that would maybe one day inspire her, whether or not they are appropriate for her to watch at this moment in time, but things that I felt like were worth going out to make, because I'm away from her for so long, and so she's really become an inspiration to me. And so when I do a movie, I want to feel emotionally connected. There couldn't have been a more emotionally connected movie than this, I think, for me. But who knows? I mean, each script has something that can touch.
Yeah, but you have to have the strength to actually allow yourself that place to say, I can be vulnerable. I can take that into something. Is that something when you think about the people you work with, that you need a work environment where you're protected, where creativity can happen? And I was thinking especially a lot with productions where it's about no. How do you create that space?
Well, on Tick, Tick, Boom, I did something very similar to In the Heights, but instead of taking a tour of Washington Heights, I wanted everyone to know Jonathan Larson as a human being. The only thing I knew before I read the script about Jonathan was that he wrote Rent. That was my entire knowledge of him. But right now, we have all these cameras pointed at us all the time. We have our cell phones running, and there's cameras everywhere, and we have no choice but to be filmed. And in 1990, that just wasn't true, but it was true for Jonathan Larson. And he had a friend whose father was a documentarian, and she recorded his life. So we had 8 years of video of him. And I would just watch the video with Lynn and the production designer and start to like just be completely amazed. And again, I fell in love with Washington Heights. I said I knew that was my job. And on this, I realized my job was to fall in love with Jonathan Larson and to really show the world his true spirit, and that we learned from these 8 years of videotapes. And it was pretty remarkable that we had them, because he also didn't ever think anyone would see them, so he was very vulnerable. So I brought a lot of the crew again to the office this time. There wasn't a big tour to do. We did look at some locations together, but we all got together and I started sharing. I shared, 6 years ago, I wouldn't have said, oh, I grew up in a tenement apartment building and we didn't have any money. And I just wouldn't have wanted to share those things. But as soon as I read the script, I'm like, oh, I want to share my story. And so there is that part of me actually is part of me telling this story. So I need to share it.
Yeah, and it's like, you feel it when you watch it. It's like, it's so much more than just making nice images. And that depth just pays back 10 times, no? Makes for a better movie too.
Yeah, there were things we did on this movie that was very much about listening rather than planning. It was Andrew has this amazing process in his acting, and it was really about the camera operators being very in tune with that. And then we did some lighting cue things that I'd sit right next to the dimmer board op, and we'd do things based on like what I was seeing in the performance on each take. And so it was really this wonderful process of discovery every day.
That's interesting. So you were adjusting the lighting within takes?
Yeah, sometimes we'd adjust the light with intakes. We did these car drive-bys for one scene or for two scenes where we wanted them not on specific lines, but like there would be specific things the actors were doing, and I would just be listening. I'd have a lot of people don't like to listen to the performance, but because of COVID, we sort of had to be like, we couldn't be right on set, and so I always had on headphones listening so that I could hear the breath. I really understood what Andrew was trying to do with his performance, and just making sure I wasn't taking away or distracting from that.
So because you were mentioning earlier about it's really a natural lighting approach, that means you were lighting rooms, or what is natural lighting for you?
Yeah, we were lighting rooms. We oftentimes used very few as few sources as possible. The apartment's mostly lit with practicals. And the stage is all, we didn't do like moving lights on the stage. We wanted it to feel very true to 1990 and where Jonathan was in his world when he does his performance, which is, it was a one night only show where very few people went, and he didn't have success. He was not successful at this moment in life, and so we wanted to make sure we were true to everything about Jonathan. I mean, there's even a few days before 2 weeks before he passed away, he took this video camera, and he was really scared there was going to be a fire in his apartment, and he literally took video of every single object in his apartment and described it. And so we knew where everything was. So, and the apartment's a complete recreation of his apartment. The painting on the walls are exactly where they were, and his friends own them now, and so they loaned them to the production. There's a blue flannel shirt that he wears in the movie, which Jonathan wore. I mean, and then, so everything that we had really was recreated based on what we knew and interviewing his friends, and it really, being true to Jonathan was everything to us. I remember there was this one moment where I watched Andrew transform into Jonathan Larson, and it was remarkable. We were watching a Sondheim musical, Sunday in the Park with George, the cast, and Lynn and me, and I was sitting in the back just like being removed just because they were having their moment watching this together. But I suddenly saw that Andrew was Jonathan, and I snapped a picture and I sent it to Lynn, and he sent it to Jonathan's real sister, and apparently it was very emotional because he really had transformed into Jonathan, and so every single choice we made was making sure that remained true.
How do you take care of this actor space and all the technical stuff that gets imposed on them? How do you create a safe space for them?
We were a very, very, very quiet set. I think it's one of the quietest sets I've worked on, and it was lovely. We didn't do lighting changes once. We would do a rehearsal, and then Andrew and the other cast would step off, and we'd do our tweaks, and that was it. Once he was back, there was no more changing things. It was about creating the space and also the room for him to move in space so that he wasn't locked into a mark, because that's where the perfect light was. In this movie, there is no perfect light. It really is about a world.
For the close-ups as well, you just change the lens, or do you change lighting too?
In the apartment, again, we would tweak things a little bit, but it really was, we tried not to change too much. And like, we didn't bring in eye lights, like this movie has, we didn't bring in any eye lights or anything in this movie at all.
And the practicals, you just let them be, or when they blow out, or how were you treating that?
We just made sure that because we're a Netflix movie, so it will be in HDR, and so that means you really want to protect your highlights. So we just made sure none of our lamps were going to get too crazy.
Just extended the lights? If you had a practical and it wasn't light coming off, you extended it, or?
No. I mean, everything was in our dimmer board, and then And then, I mean, the apartment really was teeny tiny, and we had a hard ceiling, so there was not room. It was really about how light bounced off of different objects. Like, we had some practicals that we just would just turn, like hard practicals, like wire lamps that we just turn and bounce into things.
Yeah, so you had everything on the dimmer board, basically, all the practicals as well.
All the practicals were in the dimmer board.
Cool. I think, are there any questions from the audience before I continue to hammer Alice with
sure.
questions?
Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
What was like the process, like with art department and lighting, and choosing the?
Oh, choosing the practicals? Oh, it was actually not even just between art department and lighting. We also have dance choreography, and that have to, so sometimes the choreographers also were very interested in our lamp choices. It was a process. Art department would bring in certain lamps, and then there would be things that I wanted changed, and then there would be lamps that Lynn loved. There's this one red lamp that drove me completely bonkers, but he loved it, and so I was like, okay, we'll deal with it, because he's the director. He loved the lamp, but then the production designer was amazing too. His name's Alex DiGerlando, and he was in our storyboard sessions, which is the first time I've had the production designer in storyboard sessions, which was amazing. Him and the writer. I've also never had a writer in storyboard sessions. And because Lynn approached this project, this was his first movie directing, and so he approached it like he would a play, and he didn't have to have all the right ideas from day one. It was really like, okay, let's draw it this way, and let's explore what the scene would look like this way, and then the next day we'd all come back and go, oh, no, that didn't quite work. What if we did it this way instead? And one of the biggest process, and so it was a huge discovery process, and one of the biggest discoveries that we found was a number called Swimming, if you want to go to that swimming pool. So we were location scouting for this swimming pool. We knew we had this piece of music that Jonathan had written 30 years ago called Swimming. And so we started looking at locations. And we saw this location. And Lynn loved this location because the lines on the floor, the tile for the lane lines looked like staff paper, music paper. And so then I took my iPhone, because I always have it, and I put it under the water, and everyone's like, oh my God, your phone's gonna die. I'm like, oh, it says it's waterproof. And so then, I started like filming underwater, and we found this perfectly positioned 30 at the bottom of the pool. And yeah, and it's this number that the opening number is called 3090, and Jonathan is so scared of turning 30 in 1990 is what the song is. And it's because he feels like he's going to turn 30 and he hasn't done anything with his life. And then Lynn sees from my phone this 30 right there at the bottom of the pool, and Lynn goes, what if he touches the 30 and it turns into a treble clef? And then that's how this number, I know no one's seen this movie because it's not out yet, but this is how this number became. It was this discovery. We first saw the staff paper lines, and then we saw this number 30. And it was only later on that we found out that this was actually the swimming pool that Jonathan Larson swam in for years. And there's a lyric that says red, green stripes, and there's red and green stripes in the tiles. There's references to all these numbers, and everything is so specific to this pool, and we didn't know. And there were lots of things about this movie that were like this, where it felt like Jonathan Larson was whispering in our ear, guiding us in some way, and we felt the sort of sacredness of the project.
I'm curious, I know Rob Marshall talks a bit about this idea of having to earn the musical numbers and build to a place where they feel kind of believable that that's the only way the characters can carry on expressing themselves. Is that something you talked about on either of these films, and is that something you're doing and sort of like you're building on that point as well?
Yeah, I mean, I touched a little bit on it for In the Heights. In the Heights, we have a line at the very opening of the movie before the musical where Usnavi says the streets are made of music, and that gives us a little bit of creative license. But we did have to build from the time where you see the manhole cover spinning to them dancing on the side of the building. You can't just open the movie with people dancing on the side of a building. Like, the spectacle in that gets bigger and grander and grander and grander. And then in this movie, the musicals come out of this childlikeness. And so in Tick, Tick, Boom, the musicals come out of the childlikeness. And we also have a concert as part of the storytelling element of the movie. So it takes place in 1990, and then a few years later, when Jonathan did this one-man show at what's called the New York Theater Workshop in New York, and it started as a one-man show, and then he ended up with a band and backup singers, but and that was the show Tick, Tick, Boom, which the movie's based on, and then we built out the world. The writer and Lynn built out the world of telling Jonathan Larson's story. For me, I think if I have an emotional guidance on how, I don't think I can just go into a movie and go, okay, we're going to light this in yellows and reds and blues and greens and just do it for no reason. I think I need an emotional connection and an emotional reason to tell a story. I think anytime I tell a story, it comes from a place of truth. And so the musical numbers for Jonathan are this blurred line of dreams and reality in his real life, not the stage part. And from that point is where I could start designing camera movement and lighting.
Yeah, that's the vision, right? It doesn't matter which color it is. You got something you're following, and it ends up where it ends up then, no?
Yeah.
Could you please talk about your technical and creative relationship with Bill? For example, how much was the gaffer actually like a creative person on set, as opposed to him being just a technical equalizer?
I don't believe in just working with technicians. I like to work with other people who bring some wonderful collaboration to the table and want to tell the story we're telling. And so with Bill, I always do lots of camera tests, and we had to get used to each other because we didn't know each other, and looking at images together and talking about light and different film references that we looked at too. Like, I looked a lot at Searching for Bobby Fischer while I was making this movie, just because that movie does feel so natural. Our movie's not the same, but it was the same time period, and I liked their approach to the apartment in Searching for Bobby Fischer because nothing was lit. Things got dark and people moved through space, and I loved that about that movie. And so we talked about movies like that, and I'm trying to think what else we talked about, but his whole team too were part of that creative process. Like, we had, because we were making a movie in COVID, we had so few people in Zone A that two of his electricians were also right with us, and it was really, really wonderful that we had all the three of them and the dimmer board op. So the five of us just had this really wonderful partnership, and at the end I was so sad to leave them.
Well, thanks everybody for coming, and especially thanks Alice for being here.
Thank you guys so much. It's so nice to get to be here and talk about this movie with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.